Right, good morning everybody. We are going to start, so please take your seats. My name's Emily Husain. I'm a volunteer with Nordic Model Now and I'm chairing today's event. First of all, I have to run through the slightly boring bits, which is housekeeping. There are two fire escapes at the back of the hall, one directly at the back and one to my right. In the unlikely event of a fire, that's where you head. And if you need any help, then please locate a Nordic Model Now volunteer and any of us will give you a hand. Toilets, there are toilets on the ground floor, including an accessible toilet to the right, slightly down the corridor. In terms of filming and photography, please could no one film or take photographs unless they've already got permission. This is for safety and security reasons, as you can imagine. We're also asking any journalists and professional photographers to refrain from filming or taking photographs, and could everyone avoid capturing anybody's face unless you've got their permission to do that. We are live on YouTube, and although we won't be showing the audience, it is possible if you're in the front few rows that you might be captured on video. So if you wouldn't like to be captured on video, I suggest you move back a bit. We would also love to get a discussion about today's event going on Twitter. So if you are tweeting, and we're tweeting from the Nordic Model Now account, please can use the hashtag #WomenForSale. I'm going to give a bit of a content warning now, which I'm sure you'll understand. You might find some of the things you hear today are quite distressing. We understand that they might be, and this isn't gratuitous. We think it's important to understand what we're dealing with and to be able to name it and talk about it. But we would absolutely understand if you found things upsetting and you needed to take a break. You can ask a Nordic Model Now volunteer if you need any support. The cafe towards the back of the hall on the ground floor will be open all day. There's also a quiet room which is signposted on the second floor. So if you'd like to go and sit there, you can head up there on your own or head outside, or if you'd like to ask any one of us to give you a hand, we'll absolutely do that. So we aren't taking questions in this first plenary session, but there are 3 Q&As later, so hopefully everyone will have plenty of time to ask their questions later. I would now like to welcome our first speaker, Valérie Tende, onto the stage. And we can have brilliant, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be here. I'm just going to set a little timer because I have 20 minutes with you, and every one of them is precious. All right, so it's a privilege to be here and to come here from Canada to try to explain to you as best as I can why I speak mostly on behalf of prostitution and porn, but I think we are all here to create that continuum between prostitution, porn, and surrogacy as all part of that continuum of viewing women as commodification and as exploitable. And I'm going to try to argue mostly on the angle of why all these practices calls for women to be dissociated from themselves in order to do them. And I guess for me it's easier to argue why prostitution does not work, but you can make parallel for how also offering surrogate service is also not work. So let's try to do this. Okay, so I'm just going to start by a few information on where I come from so that you understand my thinking. When I was in the sex trade, I would have said sex work is work because we need to tell ourselves a lot of things in order to do it. And so I think the lens that I have now comes from having so much distance and having had to rebuild myself after exiting the sex trade. So I was stuck in the sex trade from the ages of 16 to 23. And a factor that's quite odd in my story is I didn't have a pimp, but I had my father who was my driver throughout those 6 years in the sex trade. So what kind of references did I have? What kind of chance did I have to create a worldview of what is healthy for women and for sexuality when you've grown up being exposed to your father's porn consumption from the age of 5? And this is the model of what a cool woman is that you build in your mind. I also knew that my dad was a doorman in strip joint back in the days, and that he had worked for the mafia. So there was a lot of glamorization of this in my young person's mind. Then we can't deny the effect of movies like Pretty Woman and so on. So you grow up in a culture and you receive messages. And I apologize if some of what I say is hard, because I'm realizing more and more that when I tell my story, sometimes we need to be like not in the emotional of it, because if I was to be in the storytelling of this happens to me, then I cannot make myself live the emotional charge of what I'm telling you. So even though I look like I'm detached from it, it's just how I need to be to do this. So I tend to use my storyline just to emphasize how I didn't always think the way I do and how I came to think the way I do now and why I became an abolitionist. So as long as you're in the sex trade, there's a lot of things you need to tell yourself to do it and to pull through and to survive. And something that I see among all women who claim to be sex workers is obviously always quote, and I call it work or sex work, is that they just can't stand the thought of seeing themselves as victims. And I think it's just such a common thing. And once you either get out of it or start experiencing the consequences in your body, then the discourse of sex work is work just has no answers for you. It will not tell you why you have all these invisible pain and symptoms in your body. It explains nothing about prostitution. A big part of what I do is to argue how labor law cannot be applied to the sex trade. I don't have time to do this here today. It's not the point of my presentation, but it requires a lot of freaking mental gymnastics to try to argue that it's work and that the same protection afforded to any workers in any job could make sense in the sex trade, when the very nature of the work, quote unquote, is to be sexually available and to be sexually harassable. Because when you're in a club or in a massage parlor, and I've worked in many different types of venue, again, when I say work, please always hear the quote. I just mean when I was in it, I would say I'm going to work. Obviously, my outlook is different now. Your job in this occupation is to be available to be sexually harassed, the very nature of the job. And there's no other job where your orifices are penetrated and where you need to put your feelings of sensation, of fear, of disgust, of apprehension to off, like on pause in order to do what you do. So the very nature of prostitution calls you to become dissociated. And what makes me mad as hell is that when we argue that there's a special kind of woman who could be made to do this, who's like the type of woman to do this, it's like as if we're celebrating that there would be a kind of woman that's like able to use dissociation as a work skill. It's appalling to me, because dissociation always comes from prior trauma and a prior ability to shut yourself off and to disconnect. Now, the long-term consequences of dissociation for everyone is inflammatory condition and a whole bunch of invisible pain that appear in your body later, which you may not have access to as long as you're on automatic pilot and you're dissociated in order to do what you do. So for me, the consequences caught up with me a long time after. I got out of the sex trade at 23, and then I went back to finish my high school. I was fortunate enough to be, people believed in me, wanted to support me, so I was able to go straight to university to do some ecology because I wanted to prove myself I was smart. So after having exploited my body and my image and all these codes of sexuality and the pornified codes, I went in for several years the opposite way of just trying to like catch up on my intelligence and be hyper intellectual. So then I had a lot of anger in my late 20s, early 30s. And so the first time I went to seek therapy was about anger. And then the anger, after 15 weeks of therapy, I had to point out that the anger came from pain, from sadness, from deep sadness at what had happened to me and how, for example, my father failed to protect me and to want better for me. And then it led me to have to pinpoint that it was the sexual exploitation in my life that was the big part, the big pain and grief that I had to go through. And then only somewhere in my mid-30s did I finally get to a community agency specialized in the trauma of prostitution. And that's when I became aware of Andrea Dworkin and radical feminism. So I basically became an abolitionist after my mid-30s, because before I didn't have access to that worldview. It just wasn't it was like a paradigm shift. I had to realize, oh, okay. And when you understand abolition, and you come from having defended it as like, it's work, I'm empowered, blah, 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 it's just a major paradigm shift, but it's necessary because sex work is work, has no explanation for how you feel, for what you're experiencing, for how hard it is to get out of, and of what other profession do we say that we need help to get out of it? Oh, I need help to get out of nursing. It's like no one ever. It really, like, you have to think about the way we talk about prostitution has all the clues that you need in order to understand that it's not work. So another of my arguments is that we need to stop landscaping and organizing male sexual outlet, because we want equality, but we're not going to have it as long as there's this special class of women that we dedicate or abandon to this function in society to be a receptacle for male orgasms, and how the kind of men it builds for them to have access to this and to have compartmentalized empathy, when we know that like half of them are in a relationship that also harms other women, and it contributes to creating this whore and mother Judeo-Christian paradigm. It reinforces it. So there's a gazillion reasons why prostitution is wrong, but mostly it's that it doesn't fabricate good men, if you get what I mean, and that it forces women to be dissociated, and it celebrates dissociation as a great work skill. And then again, surrogacy is not my main topic, but I make the parallel. We're asking, and I would say it's even worse, because the way I survived prostitution was really to be super compartmentalized about it. So I would go in a sex trade, I would change my name, change my demeanor, have specific clothing for it, and then I would come home after, have a really crazy germophobic ritual, get rid of all the germs of the sex trade, and then get back to myself. So flipping on and off and on and off from myself. That's how I survive. But at some point, that doesn't work. It's just you can't pull it off anymore. And that's when it starts getting at you. So my way to survive the sex trade was to be extremely germophobic, and I was very, very sober. I never did drugs or alcohol throughout my whole stay in the sex trade. So I have a very weird story, because I had a need for control. But then when you think of women who are stuck in bringing a life, they have to dissociate from their sensation, and they cannot tune out from, it's not like I could go back to like be Valérie, who loves science and who has cats and stuff the rest of the time, but if you're a surrogate for 9 months full time, and before that you're drugged up in hormones, and after that the grief, like I just can't, it is by far the most dissociative experience that we're demanding of women for me, surrogacy. It's an extra additional level of, why are women always these, expected to like cater to and be the givers of everything, like, so this brings us to gender as a construct of what are women expected to do and be in society. So yeah, I have a gazillion ways to argue why we need to stop treating women in this way. And prostitution is a big deal, because in Canada we're fortunate enough to have the Nordic model, and after here, this is the first date of a 30-day stretch of about 11 conferences I'm going to be doing. I kind of created a little tour for myself, because if I come to Europe, I have to like make it worth it. So I booked myself everywhere throughout France, Switzerland, and Belgium. And in France, I'll get to like have longer time where I argue on why it's not working. I think we need to use their vocabulary. So like if they argue it could be unionized and so on, we need to like use the way they defend it to say, here's everything you choose to ignore. Because you will never hear the pro-sex work lobby talk about dissociation, talk about trauma, consequences, high suicide rate, depression. They just don't talk about that. So it's everything you choose to ignore that I want you to focus on when you hear them talk, and point out like, what about this and that? And you'll see there's a gazillion things. They behave as if we know nothing about prostitution. They behave as if it's just like a thought happening, when it's a very real thing happening to women in women's body, and our body is us. And that's what I gain most from leaving the sex trade, is reconnecting. And I think now the reason why I choose to be an activist with my name and my face is because other survivors need some of us to be able to do it, and also because I refuse adamantly to be dissociated in any way. There has to be one Valérie at all time with everyone. I'm the same person backstage and on stage and on the street and helping someone cross the street. I want to be the same one coherent person all the time. And that's from having been so dissociated before. Now, I have 8 minutes left with you. I'm going to give you an example of major paradigm shift. So throughout the time I was in the sex trade, I was actually glad that my father was my driver. I thought it was cool. I thought, like, he's not judging me. He's not taking money from me. He was, like, driving me for free. So what does he get out of this? Well, it's only years later in therapy that I got to understand that he lived vicariously his dream porn life through me. Through me, he had access to, like, fetish nights, and I would go to fetish nights at 17 years old with my father. That is really not normal. But when I was in it, I thought that's cool, that's subversive, that's open-minded. Do you see how far I had to, like... And when I tell my story to people, the way they reacted to it started to make me understand, okay, I guess that's not normal. But I had no other frame of reference before. And for me, the breaking point from going from thinking it's cool and it's practical, he doesn't charge me money, wonderful, he's my driver, was when I was in the parking lot of a strip joint. And I'm 23 years old, I've had sciatic pain for 2 years, I can't stand a job anymore, my back is killing me. And the more I go to school, what is expected of me, again, dissociation, what is expected of me during the daytime on the school bench versus what is expected of me at night in the strip joints, which, please don't be fooled, are prostitution, they just masquerade as strip joint. That contrast was becoming unbearable. And so I'm in the parking lot of this strip joint and I tell my dad, Dad, I just received a bursary. I can go to university and they're paying for my school. It's like they want me to study science. It's like amazing. I just finished my high school as an adult and I can go straight to university as a mature student and people are supporting me. And then I tell him that. Bluntly, he just goes, yeah, but I tell him I have to quit stripping. He's like, well, you can't stop stripping. Like, how are you going to pay rent? And then for the months following, he would constantly try to bring me back to it. Every time I was short on money, he was like, well, you could go work in that place that my friend owns, or how about sexy waitressing? You could. He was constantly trying to bring me back to the sex trade. And that's when my universe shattered, and I understood, for the love of fuck, you really don't want better for me. But before that, I didn't have access to that. So it was like, oh my God. And then that's when I started to understand, and that's when I started to resent myself. I was constantly telling myself, why did I buy into this? How did I not see this? Why at 16 years old, the first time a man offers me money for sex, I'm just detached, I'm professional, I know what to do. Like, where does that come from? And you don't have access to that when you're in the trade. You need to be out, to have some distance, to have the consequence catch up with you. And that's what happened. And I'm fortunate that there was some free services and community agencies that offered me free counseling, group support, and that amazing counselors who oriented my reading so that I could read up the testimonies of other survivors and realize that I have a lot more in common with them than with anything. And then to bring it up to the systemic level and realize I have a lot more in common with every woman. And to realize that I'm part of my own sex class. And to decide to then become fervent abolitionist and want to connect with sorority, which I did not have access to as long as I was in the trade and I was competitive with other women. Because I like to view myself as like more like one of the guys or like strong. But seeing yourself as one of the guys doesn't give you access to sorority. It's internalized misogyny. So long story short, I think I'm thankful for all the major paradigm shift I've experienced, and I'm happy that I wanted to do the growth and I wanted to understand myself. And I think for many survivors to understand what is not their fault and how there is a whole entire system that commands their entry into the sex trade and wants to maintain them there is liberating. So realizing I'm a victim of something bigger than me doesn't mean I victimize myself. I don't have a victimizing posture towards life. So I think, I'm just really optimistic, actually. I'm annoyingly optimistic. I want to think it's possible in my own life, hopefully if I live old enough, to see several countries take the switch. If I see Germany or Switzerland switch during my lifetime, it would be amazing. And I know that going to Switzerland is one of the most hostile places I'm going on my tour. And I'm going to be speaking at the University of Geneva, which is a hub of pro-sex work. Bring it on, seriously, because I think none of their argument hold ground like scrutiny. It's just if you show everything they choose to ignore and not talk about, And that's what I plan to do. I have nothing better to do with my life than to do this pédagogie. And I'm just very happy right now. Like, I'm happy because I decided to put meaning in my life and to give back. I understand that public speaking is not for everyone, but for me, it gives tremendous meaning to my life, because living with that life experience and not putting it to use, that would be hard. It would be like I'm living with all of this, but so using it and giving purpose to my life to hopefully try to warn other women who might think it's a good idea to not fall in that trap, and tell survivors that everything you're experiencing in your body today is normal. You have to accept it. So I'm very cautious about understanding that I could always regress. I suffered an armed robbery in 2017, and I regress like you wouldn't believe. I went back into hypervigilant mode where I would like check my lock several times, and I would get up to wait to make sure. I would debate like, should I put a lot of heavy objects in front of the door? But then if I need medical assistance, they won't be able to get in. And I was going mad about all these scenarios. And during COVID, it really triggered my germophobia again. So you're never fully out. You just need to have this humility that you don't know how trauma can catch up with you. And now that's the position I have. Like, I know that I could regress anytime. There could be a very super triggering event and I could regress again, and that's fine, because the journey in and of itself is what it's all about. So I'm annoyingly optimistic. I think it's possible. I think the practice of legalizing prostitution is also always very racist, obviously, because it's always women from other countries that are trafficked. And since it's been the abolitionist model in France, where do men go? They go to La Jonquera in Spain, or they go to neighboring countries that allow it. At the end of the month, I'm going to Belgium, where they are trying really hard to legalize pimping. That's like just insanity. So when the pro-sex work lobby talks, they will try to make you believe that we're trying to tell women what to do with their body and whatnot, but they don't talk about the real thing. The real thing is they want to allow third party to structure our resale. They really want to legalize pimping. That is what they want to do, because under the Nordic model, we are allowed to sell ourselves. So if I wanted to be a blinded, free-willing agent, I could. So what are we talking about? We're talking about structuring this, having legit venues where men can go and empty themselves. I'm sorry, I will not stand for that. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm really happy that your attention is wonderful. Be optimistic.
Hi everyone, I'm going to stand because I like to move a little as I talk. My name is Hannah Chaban. I am Head of Service Delivery for a women's charity in Coventry called Kairos, and today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the work that we do at Kairos, as well as focusing on the experiences of the young women that we support in how social media is being used as a mechanism to groom and sexually exploit the young women that we support. So I've been assured that if I click this button, fab, there we go. So, Kairos, as I said, we are a small charity in Coventry that is run by and for women, and we support women who've got complex and multiple unmet needs and are at risk of or subject to sexual exploitation, including street-based prostitution. We want to see a world where every woman matters and all women are living free from exploitation, violence and abuse. And we do this, broadly speaking, through the provision of practical and emotional support, advocacy, awareness raising and peer support groups. I often get asked what the word kairos means, and kairos is a Greek word meaning opportune or critical moment for change, and it's very reflective of the way that we like to try and work at Kairos, being led by and for the women that we support. So, as I mentioned, the women that we support have got multiple needs. All the women that we support have experienced significant trauma. Many have grown up in care. Many are living in abject poverty, have no safe space to call home, have experienced sexual violence or domestic abuse, or are in coercive or controlling relationships, involved in the criminal justice system, and many face barriers to accessing support services. Many of the women that we support, or all of the women that we support, are subject to systemic injustice, often being victim blamed for the situations that they find themselves in. When we speak to the women about their situations, none of the women report that this is something that they would like to do. Rather, they don't see it that they have any other choice. And that's why we want to offer women pathways to exit prostitution when they are ready. And we want all women that we support to live safe and fulfilled lives. We are a values-based organisation, and that is central to the work that we do at Kairos. We believe in compassion, so we want all the women that come into our service to feel loved and respected and welcome and not judged. We believe in empowering women. Many of the women might come to us needing some practical support in a moment of crisis, whether that might be food, a shower, somewhere to come in to a safe space. But we will journey with women for as long as they need to help build their independence and help them to live fulfilled lives in a safe way. We believe in justice, so we advocate for the women that we support. But as an organisation, we also want to advocate on a local and regional level as well, challenging the systems that don't recognise the needs of the women that we support. We are women-centred. We have a women's-only hub, which offers both an emotionally and physically safe space for the women when they need to. We are trauma-informed, so we recognise that the impact trauma has had on the lives of the women that we support and how this might impact their situations. And we also want to hold that in our practice as practitioners. And we always hold hope for the women. Our service and our door is always open for whenever they want to come to us. Our support is open-ended and there for as long as they need. So these are our services. We've got 4 main services. We offer a feeling safe service for our young women, aged 16 to 24. And this is a transitional safeguarding service, so supporting young women as they transition into adulthood. This offers, again, holistic, intensive, practical and emotional support and a peer support group. We have a service for women over 25, many of whom are involved in street-based prostitution, and we work with them holistically, helping them to with organising multi-agency case coordination and accessing support. Many of our women are experiencing insecure or unsuitable accommodation, and we have a specialist housing service which supports women to access safe accommodation. We've got a service that supports women who are involved in the criminal justice system, including prison in-reach. We've got a support group for women who are pregnant. Many of our women have got children's services involvement, and that's co-facilitated with a midwife. We have an evening outreach and drop-in, which provides harm reduction for women, a multi-agency drop-in where women can come into our hub and access support from other services, as well as counselling, life skills and wellbeing courses. So as I've said today, I want to speak to you about the experiences of our young women and raise awareness on the realities of how social media is acting as a grooming mechanism, leading girls and young women into being sexually exploited. And I wanted to start by taking a minute just to make sure that we can think about what we mean by sexual exploitation. So the United Nations defines sexual exploitation as an actual or attempted abuse of someone's position of vulnerability to obtain sexual favours by offering money or other social, economic or political advantages. It can include exchanges online, trafficking and prostitution. Our Feeling Safe service supports young women 16 to 25. All of the young women that we support have got various vulnerabilities which puts them at risk of sexual exploitation. This might include poverty, homelessness, substance use, as I've mentioned. Many of them... Thank you. Many of the young women that we support have experienced childhood abuse or childhood trauma. Many have grown up in care. Many have had might not have had positive experiences of healthy relationships or boundaries and don't have positive support networks. All of this combined, as they transition into adulthood, makes this a really vulnerable time for the young women that we're supporting. As children under the age of 18, they are safeguarded by the law, and local authority and statutory services should be providing services to protect them. But when they turn 18, the support that they have as children stops overnight. And actually we know that vulnerabilities don't change overnight. You don't wake up on your 18th birthday with all the vulnerabilities removed that you might have been experiencing as a child. And this is called an ageing out of services and puts our young women at real risk, because all of a sudden the support that they have from statutory services and the law stops. And this makes our young women isolated and vulnerable and becomes an opportune moment for groomers and perpetrators to form relationships, often through the social media that our young women are using, and puts them at greater risk of sexual exploitation. One of the issues that we see and that our young women report is that involvement in adult services websites such as OnlyFans is often glamorised. We see headlines on TikTok such as women using platforms such as OnlyFans to make hundreds of thousands of pounds. And we know that that reality is just not the case, with women having reported working over 40 hours a week and only earning £100. We also know how dangerous it is once intimate images are on the internet, that they can be used, reused, and reformed, and that harm and abuse is then ongoing forever. For our young women who may be living in isolation, who may be living in poverty, this glamorisation that we see on TikTok might make it really, really attractive to them. And then we know that there's often little discussion around the harm that it can cause. We also see that once women become involved in OnlyFans, that their fans, as they are called, can push boundaries with the young women and expect them to do more than perhaps they had originally intended to. And this puts our young women at real risk, being forced to meet or carry out actions which they may not have otherwise intended to. We also see that social media is evolving and changing all the time, making it really hard to track and understand what is going on. Our young women report that they might have their intimate images posted, or the use of deepfakes. And when we say deepfakes, that's an artificial intelligence that is based on a real image. And again, once these images are out there, then they are used by anybody. They can be reshared, reposted, and that can be a lifetime of harm caused by perpetrators posting intimate images or deepfakes of the young women that we support. These can also be used by perpetrators to threaten or coerce or intimidate our young women, again forcing them into further forms of exploitation, maybe forcing them to meet, starting that grooming relationship. Our women report that they have incidents of catfishing, where somebody would create a fake identity and again pose as somebody else, maybe making promises of rewards, friendship, relationships, and again that can start the relationship for our young women who are vulnerable, where they can become groomed into further forms of exploitation. And now we have to contend with AI and AI chatbots, and we're already hearing reports of how AI chatbots are encouraging girls and young women to post intimate images and other dangerous acts like self-harm. And we know that there is a really, really poor response when we report these incidents of intimate images or deepfakes or catfishing. The social media sites are very, very slow to take down these actions or do anything about it. Often, because the exploitation that we see is happening on these mainstream sites, there is little recognition that this is exploitation, or little understanding of the harm that it's being caused. Our women have reported, for instance, selling shoes on Facebook and then being approached by a perpetrator to ask for money for an image of their body rather than the shoes that they were selling. a woman might be approached on a mainstream social media site for a date, and if she declines the date, then they have reported that they then get approached with an offer of money in exchange for a sexual act. We've also had reports from our young women that their number is being shared without their consent, and then they are being approached by multiple men. All of these things are happening through mainstream sites, but because it's happening on the mainstream sites, it's normalised, and again, there is a very poor response from social media sites to do anything about it. Some harmful sites have been taken down, but they are often recreated very, very quickly without little accountability, guidance or regulation. So we are definitely not saying that all social media sites and internet is bad. There is a place for it, but our young women need to be safe to be able to use it and not victim blamed for the situations that they might find in. We need to be able to shift the focus on ensuring that perpetrators aren't using social media sites in a harmful way, and we need to ensure that social media sites take prompt and responsive action when it is reported of intimate image abuse or deepfakes or catfishing or some of the incidents that I've mentioned. And in addition, we need the law and the police to reflect and be responsive to the harm that this is causing so that perpetrators are charged. In the meantime, we want to make sure that we are raising awareness around some of the risks and some of the harms that are being caused. And through services like ours, we continue to offer young women specialist support. I would encourage you, if you are supporting a young woman or have a family or friend that you are worried about, to have an open and honest conversation with them and seek out support from organisations like ours if you are in need. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Heli, and I'm going to explain the Nordic model approach to prostitution, law and policy, and why we believe it's superior to other approaches. Prostitution is a personal and important issue for me for two main reasons. Firstly, I grew up in the shadow of what I call the sexploitation industry. I grew up indoctrinated into thinking that the sexual objectification, humiliation, and oppression of women is normal. That the female function is to be of service, use, and wherever possible, a pleasure to and for men. It took me decades to realize my beliefs were the core of our female oppression. Secondly, I live in the Netherlands, where prostitution is legal. I'm appalled by the casual acceptance of the notion that some women have a right, that some women choose to be fodder for men, and that non-prostituted women have a right to the amorphous safety provided by the fact that other women are being prostituted. The Nordic model is the only approach to prostitution policy and legislation that recognizes prostitution as part of the structural oppression of women and other marginalized groups. It is both a cause and a consequence of the persistent inequality between the sexes. It is an abuse of all women's human rights. If one woman can be bought, any woman or girl can be. Pimps and sex traffickers know this. The Nordic model was introduced in Sweden in 1999 after extensive research revealed A, the extent of women's suffering in prostitution, and B, sex buyers' ignorance and lack of care of the consequences of their choices and actions. It was notable that researchers found the women's testimonies to be so harrowing they needed to be trauma counseled afterwards. The researchers developed the idea of one-sided criminalization where buyers, rather than those selling sex, would be held accountable. In brief, the Nordic model decriminalizes selling sex because no one should be criminalized for enduring exploitation and abuse. 2, it invests in services that provide support and genuine routes out of prostitution. Most research shows that 90% of those involved in prostitution at any given time want to get out, but can't see how to. The services need to include access to safe, affordable housing, training, healthcare, childcare, legal and financial advice and aid, emotional and psychological support, and drug rehabilitation. 3, the Nordic model makes buying sex a criminal offence with the key aim of changing men's attitudes and behaviour. It aims to create a society where no man could even imagine he has the right to sexually exploit another human being. The penalty for offences is typically a fine rather than prison, which provides funding for the services. 4, the Nordic model strengthens laws against trafficking, pimping, and brothel keeping. 5, included with all of the above, there needs to be a plethora of holistic measures, including public information campaigns, education in schools, training for the police, long-term investments in services and alternatives for women, and real, concrete, and concerted measures to address poverty and inequality. Where the Nordic model is well implemented, it has been shown to reduce the size of the industry and create a hostile environment for international sex traffickers. In Sweden, it has brought about a change in the culture and men's behaviour. It has widespread public support, particularly among women and young people. Prostitution hasn't been limited, but surveys indicate that the percentage of Swedish men who buy sex dropped from 13.6% in 1996 to 7.4% in 2014, of which only 0.8% said that they had bought sexual services within the last year. It's not surprising, therefore, that the sexploitation industry hates the Nordic model. They insist it is more dangerous for the women involved, which is simply not true, as I will show. Nothing can make prostitution safe, which is why the Nordic model aims to give women genuine routes out and to prevent particularly girls, but all marginalised young people, from being drawn into it. What the sexploitation industry wants is full decriminalisation, which means that all aspects of the sex trade are legal. Pimps and brothel keepers are transformed into legitimate business people, and buying sex is like going to a restaurant. Under full decriminalisation, prostitution is regarded as a standard business, so there's no public funding for services to help women exit. Laws against trafficking are retained, but in practice, they are almost impossible to enforce. Full decriminalisation is held up by sex industry lobbyists as the best approach to prostitution. New Zealand pioneered full decriminalisation in 2003. It has now been in place there for just over 20 years, and it is claimed by lobbyists and even the New Zealand government that there has been a decrease in the number of people involved, that it's safer for women, that women can refuse clients or particular services, that brothels have regular health inspections, and that condom use is compulsory. These are the claims. However, the data in the New Zealand government's own assessment does not support a single one of their claims. The data actually shows that after the law was passed, there was a rapid increase in the size of the industry. Violence and coercion remain rife. Women can seldom refuse clients or specific acts. Unprotected sex is common because men always, or nearly always, ask for it. And there have only been 11 brothel inspections in 12 years, even though more than 1,000 brothel licenses have been granted in the same period. Another claim is that there is no sex trafficking in New Zealand. It is true that there have been no prosecutions for sex trafficking since decriminalisation has been in force. However, there were 113 recorded cases that meet the international definition of sex trafficking in the 9 years to 2011, and without doubt many more since then that have never been recorded. When sexploitation becomes legal, it always leads to an increase in the numbers involved, not least because it sends out a message of official approval. Prostitution is a normal job. Buying sex is no different from getting a haircut or going for a pint, which means that more men visit brothels more frequently. When sexploitation is legal in combination with the increase in the numbers involved, the police have less oversight, and most sex trafficking is not detected, meaning that in practice, sex trafficking is also decriminalised. Under the Prostitution Reform Act legislation, sex crimes against children are considered minor offences, comparable to alcohol violations. So most sexual exploitation of children also goes unregistered. We have some flyers at the stall in the lobby to provide more information about the results in New Zealand. Please pick one up on your way out. The slide compares full decriminalisation, yes, within the Nordic model. The left-hand column shows what full decriminalisation means. Selling sex, pimping, brothels, and buying sex are illegal. And because it's considered a normal job, legitimate job, no public money is invested in services to help women exit. The right-hand column shows the Nordic model. Selling sex is legal, but pimping, brothels, and buying sex are illegal, and there is specific public funding for high-quality, holistic services to provide support and genuine routes out to all those involved. Germany and the Netherlands have legalized prostitution, which in theory is different from full decriminalisation. There are, in fact, many similarities. In both countries, there's a massive industry with huge numbers of people involved. Both New Zealand and Germany have multi-story brothels operating in plain sight. In Germany, about 1 million men buy sex every single day. Pimps and brothel owners are considered respectable business people. Men buying prostituted women is seen as akin to going shopping. In one German mega brothel, sale day costs €50, which includes sauna, snacks, rest area, and as many women as you want. This chart uses publicly available data to show the percentage of the population involved in prostitution in 6 countries. Germany and the Netherlands with legalization, New Zealand with so-called decriminalisation, and Sweden, Norway and France, which have implemented the Nordic model. This shows that a much smaller percentage of the population is involved in prostitution under the Nordic model than with legislation or full decriminalisation. This suggests that the Nordic model is effective in reducing the size of the industry, or at least in preventing its growth. Campaigners for full decriminalisation say the Nordic model is more dangerous for the women involved. If this were true, we would expect to see higher rates of homicide of women involved in prostitution in countries that have implemented the Nordic model, and lower rates in countries that have legalisation or decriminalisation. This chart shows the number of women involved in prostitution murdered by pimps and punters. It is expressed as an average annual rate per 100,000 female citizens during the years in which the legislative framework has been in place. This clearly shows that the homicide of women involved in prostitution is significantly higher in New Zealand, Germany, and the Netherlands than it is in Sweden, Norway, or France. This suggests that the claims that the Nordic model is more dangerous for women involved in prostitution is patently false. However, we want to be clear, we are not claiming that the Nordic model is safer for women, because we do not believe that anything can make prostitution safe. Instead, it aims to reduce the amount of prostitution that takes place and the numbers of people involved. This data suggests that when implemented well, the Nordic model is successful in this. The fact is that prostitution is a dangerous occupation far more dangerous than being a firefighter or police officer. To illustrate this, I'm going to end with a quote from a recent article by Valerie Husain, an American academic. The homicide rate for prostitutes is 229 per 100,000, which is higher than the highest workplace homicide rates of any regular occupation, such as liquor store workers, 8 in 100,000, taxi drivers, 27 in 100,000, and US soldiers counting combat-related deaths, 27 in 100,000 between 1980 and 2010. Yes, that is correct. Prostitutes are almost 10 times more likely to be killed than soldiers in combat. There is literally no category of work with a homicide rate as high as prostitution. This should tip us all off to the fact this is not work, but in fact a form of socially sanctioned violence. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Valerie, Hannah and Heli. We are so proud to have such an incredible lineup of speakers and workshops today, and we really look forward to sharing all of this with you. We're going to have a short break, but first I just want to let you know a couple of things. A number of organisations have stalls here today around the building. Nordic Model Now and Male Allies Challenging Sexism are in the lobby. Stop Surrogacy Now UK, Cease, NIA and a lesbian organising group are at the back of the hall here. And there's feminist merch for sale on the first floor. We will be talking about what you can do to get involved later in the day, but Nordic Model Now is a small organisation and we are run entirely by unpaid activists. So if you would like to get involved with us and volunteer, please go to the Nordic Model Now stall during the lunch break and talk to Eileen, one of our volunteers, who will be at the registration desk, which is by the front door. After the break, we have the workshop sessions. We could have the slide. Thank you. These are the options, although unfortunately I'm afraid the Interviewing Survivors workshop isn't being run, but the others are still on. There are more details on today's printed programmes, and if you haven't got one, you can get one at the Nordic Model Now stall in the lobby. The programme and the slide here show the rooms the workshops are being run in. The library is upstairs, and I'm very sorry to say that there isn't a lift. It's an old building. We're really sorry about that. But to get to the ground floor workshop rooms, you go down the corridor where the toilets are. Please note that one of the workshops is for women only and one is for men only. We ask that you are respectful of this due to the sensitive nature of the topics that we're going to be discussing in these workshops. The workshops also have limited space because of the sizes of the rooms. We are operating on a first-come, first-served basis, but hopefully there'll be room for you in the workshop you'd like, and there's plenty of room here in the hall for everybody else. Everything that goes on here in the main hall is being recorded and will be freely available after the event on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to watch recordings of anything that happened in here that you missed because you're in a workshop. We are going to start the next session here in the main hall at 11:10 sharp. We're actually running really well to time, so we will be starting bang on. If you could be back in your seats by then, that would be brilliant. Thank you very much. So try and look at the audience. Hello again, everyone. We're going to start in just a minute. So if you're here for the surrogacy session and the Q&A, please can you grab a seat? Right, we're going to kick off now, so could everybody take a seat? Thank you very much. We have 4 brilliant speakers for you now who are all going to cover a different area, a different aspect of surrogacy. Sadly, 2 of our speakers who were billed to be talking, Gary Powell and Marian Isabel, are unwell and aren't able to be with us in person, and we wish them well and we hope they get better soon. However, Gary has recorded a short talk that we're going to play, and Lexi from Stop Surrogacy Now UK is going to read Marianne's talk for her. After the talk, we will be having a Q&A session. You'll be able to ask questions from the floor. We'll have roving mics, but we also have a Slido on which you can submit questions. It's very simple to use. You just go to www.slido.com and you enter the participant code Nordic Model 24. You'll be prompted to enter your question. Please keep it short and make it clear which of our speakers you'd like to ask. Otherwise, I can put it to the panel generally. You can give us your name or you can ask your questions anonymously if you prefer. I would now like to welcome our first speaker, who is Anna Fisher, who will be up here in just a sec. Sorry, I think I've caught her heading to the stage. Brilliant. Excellent. So please welcome Anna Fisher. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to briefly run through the current law on surrogacy in England and Wales and the key features of the Law Commission's recommendations for change. Currently, there's a total ban on advertising surrogacy. Theoretically, only altruistic surrogacy is allowed. And when the child is born, the birth mother is the legal mother. The commissioning parents then have to apply for a parental order from the courts. This involves CAFCAS undertaking an assessment of their suitability and a judge ruling in what he considers the child's best interest. But even when surrogacy is truly altruistic, there's no guarantee it will go well. We know several women who've been altruistic surrogate mothers for family or close friends, and for whom it went terribly wrong. These women's stories illustrate 2 major problems with the reality of surrogacy. A, how easily women are enticed into doing it, and B, that it generates a profound conflict of interests between the birth mother and the commissioning parents, who invariably have a sense of entitlement and ownership over the fetus before it is born. But things get even more complicated when money is involved. women can be paid so-called reasonable expenses. These currently average between £12,000 and £20,000, which is more than a lot of women earn in a year. And the amounts involved can be considerably more when the child is born under a commercial arrangement in, for example, California. The payments must be approved by the judge who deals with the parental order. In practice, receipts are not required, and to our knowledge, judges have never refused a parental order on the basis of excessive payments. So in reality, it's not true that only altruistic surrogacy is allowed. Women are already being paid to be surrogate mothers, and in many cases, agencies are making a handsome income out of it. The Law Commission recently undertook a major project on surrogacy. The commissioner in charge was Professor Nicholas Hopkins, whose area of expertise is property law. So, a project that aimed to make it easier for men in particular to gain access to children as if they are private property, by instrumentalizing women as if they are public property, was run by a man with no known expertise in women and children's welfare and rights, but who was instead an expert in the law of property. The Law Commission presented recommendations in a draft bill to Parliament last year. While it doesn't appear on the new government's immediate agenda, we believe it is likely to take it up at some point. Key recommendations include what they call a new pathway to parenthood, tighter restrictions on what can be paid to birth mothers, and an end to the advertising ban. Also regulated not-for-profit agencies and a national register of surrogacy arrangements. I'll go through these separately. There will be some restrictions on who can qualify for the new pathway, but those who don't will be able to use something akin to the current system. The new pathway is broken into 3 phases. The first preconception stage involves the parties finding each other, usually facilitated by an agency. Then they all need to undergo basic health checks and criminal record checks and have independent legal advice and what they call implications counselling. This won't be therapeutic counselling looking at why the woman wants to undergo such a dangerous procedure for someone else's benefit, but will inevitably be more a rubber stamping exercise. There will also be a very shallow assessment of the welfare of any child born of the arrangement, but this won't be comparable with pre-adoption assessments. There won't even be a home visit. Once all this has been negotiated, lawyers will draw up a written agreement for the parties to sign. This will specify what the birth mother will be paid, and this will be the only legally binding part of the agreement. So, on to the conception, pregnancy, and birth stage. This is most surrogate pregnancies are based on donor eggs. This is preferred by the industry because it ensures there's no genetic link between the birth mother and the child, which weakens any claim she may subsequently make to the child. So commercial surrogacy is predicated on harvesting eggs from healthy young women. This is risky and can lead to serious health complications and even death. The Law Commission made no recommendations for measures to reduce the risk for the women involved. Donor egg pregnancies are also at significantly greater risk of complications, some of which are life-threatening. These additional risks are thought to be due to the mother's immune response to the fetus because it doesn't share her DNA. Another risk factor is multiple births. Implanting multiple embryos is recognized to put both birth mother and fetus at higher risk and is generally discouraged. But in surrogacy, there is a greater incentive for ignoring this and going for 2 for the price of 1. It is alarming that the Law Commission didn't recommend measures that would reduce these risks, such as allowing only 1 embryo to be transferred, introducing an upper age limit for surrogate mothers, and limiting the number of surrogate pregnancies that a woman can undertake. Their only concession was a lower age limit of 21. The Animal Welfare Act places many restrictions on dog breeders, including limits on age and the number of pregnancies. How shocking is that? More legal protections for female dogs than for women. Under the new pathway, the commissioning parents automatically will become the legal parents of the child at the moment of birth. This is what all the vested interests want: certainty. Certainty that the commissioning parents get to legally own the baby and the gravy chain gets their fees. If the birth mother has second thoughts, she must take action within 6 weeks and then apply to the courts for a parental order. But even if the child was conceived from her own egg, the commissioning parents are likely to have custody and more resources and the support of the brokers and lawyers. So she's unlikely to be granted a parental order even if she has the wherewithal to pursue one. Much of this is justified by the claim that one or both the commissioning parents are the biological parent because they supplied the sperm or egg. But this disappears the role and the relationship of the birth mother. Without her, eggs and sperm are waste products. Removing the birth mother's automatic right to be the legal mother not only removes an important safeguard to the child's welfare, but would also set a precedent that will inevitably impact all women down the line, because it reduces the enormous biological and psychological investment of pregnancy and childbirth to the equivalence of a man's ejaculation or a wad of cash. The Law Commission recommends strictly limiting what the birth mothers can be paid to the actual cost she incurs and modest gifts, along with a mechanism for enforcing this. This purports to ensure that she is not coerced into it for financial gain and to reduce the risks of women being exploited. This would be admirable if they weren't also sanctioning an entire feeding chain of NGOs, lawyers, counsellors, fertility clinics, and health professionals who will financially benefit from the arrangement. In other words, a commercial system for everyone apart from the one person without whom it could not exist. As such, it can only be seen as exploitative of women's generosity and socialization to put everyone's needs before their own. This reveals the contradictions in the idea that altruistic surrogacy is possible at mass scale. It simply is not. The proposed ending of the advertising ban will lead to more people wanting to take advantage of surrogacy and even thinking they have a right to it. Young women are already bombarded by online adverts like this one from fertility clinics seeking to harvest their eggs. The ads present a rosy picture and don't mention the grave risks, and they play on women's socialization and generosity. This is pure emotional manipulation. It also exposes the hypocrisy of the fertility industry. The egg donor is considered the mother when it suits them, but not when it doesn't. It all depends on who is paying for what. If the egg donor is a commissioning parent, she's considered the biological mother, and the woman who carries and births the child is dismissed as an irrelevance. But if the egg is implanted into a woman who will keep the child, that woman is considered the biological mother, and the egg donor is dismissed as an irrelevance. This is a US advert. If restrictions on advertising are removed, the big tech companies will push adverts like this onto the feeds of young women, and no doubt there'll also be no mention of the risks. This will send out the message to women that surrogacy is a reasonable thing to do. For women in financial difficulties, even the prospect of modest expenses might seem like a godsend. They'll also push adverts for surrogacy services onto the feeds of gay men, single men, and infertile and high-flying women. This will increase the demand for surrogacy in the sense that it is a right. We don't allow advertising for things like smoking that carry health risks. How on earth can it be justified for surrogacy, which carries so many risks, including premature death? The recommendation for regulated not-for-profit agencies may sound reasonable, but in practice they will need to cover their costs, which no doubt will include swanky offices and hefty salaries, meaning that commercial objectives will drive them and they will need to continuously seek new business and new women who can be convinced or coerced to rent out their wombs. Children have a right to know their origins, so we tentatively support the proposals for a national surrogacy register. It is claimed that the Law Commission is recommending an altruistic system, but that is smoke and mirrors. If it were true, there's no reason why the current system couldn't be maintained, where the birth mother automatically has legal parenthood, and if she agrees, the commissioning parents can then apply for a parental order. The reason for this proposed change is that the commissioning parents and the whole gravy train want certainty. They want the baby to be transferred no matter what, and they want their fees. They are terrified that she will change her mind, even though in practice it is much more common for the commissioning parents to change theirs. Although the Law Commission recommends strict controls on what the birth mother can be paid, many others will financially benefit. And opening up surrogacy will normalize surrogacy, increase demand for it, and the sense that it is a right. These are all clear signs of a commercial system. Buying and selling babies is absolutely forbidden under international law. If the commissioning parents pay a woman to undergo pregnancy and childbirth and are automatically granted legal parenthood at the moment of birth, how is that not buying the baby? What are they paying her for otherwise? When we legitimize the commodification of babies, it changes our understanding of a child from a unique member of a family and community to whom we all share a responsibility, into seeing the child as private property of one or two individuals of no business to anyone else. This implicitly justifies society withdrawing collective resources from women and children and the destruction of the social safety net. Similarly, commodifying women's reproductive capacities reduces women to instruments for the use of others, just like with prostitution. And it dilutes the understanding of motherhood, which would affect all mothers now and in the future. Opening up surrogacy to the full fury of the capitalist markets would be a seismic catastrophe for women, for children, for humanity. We must resist it at all costs. Thank you.
Well, it's my turn. So thank you for inviting me here. Thank you for everything, Anna and the Nordic Model Now, for having me here as a child born through surrogacy and giving my own perspective and viewpoint on the subject. I'm actually really glad that the universal abolition of surrogacy has become a priority for a lot of us, and that this subject kind of transcends all ideological worldviews and political positions. I think it's great that all of us here are present and we can focus on this issue despite our own differences. And this kind of proves that we must all start talking and discussing the issue to protect the rights of children and women. And of course, protecting human dignity, which has no political color nor religion. It concerns all of us. So as a short introduction, I'm Olivia Morel, 32 years old. I'm married and I'm a mother of 3 incredible children. And I'm a big believer in fighting for human rights, for just society in general. And I'm a very proud feminist as well, wishing to fight for women's rights, but and also a very big advocate for children's rights in this very particular world that we live in today. So what brought me here today is that I am a pure product of surrogacy, a pure product that's been advocating very harshly against surrogacy since June 2023 on social media. And then I joined the Declaration of Casablanca, which is an NGO that aims towards the abolition of the practice by the use of an international treaty. And I very proudly became their spokesperson recently, so that's that. I have to say that all of this has cost me a lot, especially my relationship with my parents. I don't talk to them anymore. They have decided to cut me out of their lives. I guess because they thought that I was fighting against them, and in total honesty, I'm not fighting against them. I don't blame them. I don't hate them. I love them. I am fighting against governments. I'm fighting against the pro-surrogacy lobby. I mean, this all has been very difficult for me, you have to understand. But I needed to get my story out. I needed to get my story out there because a lot of children born from surrogacy will never be able to talk. So here I am in front of you. So I came into the world via surrogacy in Louisville, Kentucky in the United States on December 10th, 1991. And it's a date that will forever be engraved in my heart because my country, the United States of America, by letting surrogacy be illegal, asked me to pay a very high price as a newborn just to be able to satisfy a couple's desires to have children. And if I'm being totally honest with you, I hate my birthday, and I will forever hate my birthday because it is the day that I lost my mother forever. So I always knew something was off during my entire life because I had, issues with my parents. There were differences. I've always felt inside of me that something was wrong. 17 years old, I opened Google, and because I was having a huge identity crisis, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I was going with my life. And I Googled Louisville, Kentucky, and surrogacy agencies popped up, and that's kind of where it hit me, and it hit me strong, because that's when I knew I was born via surrogacy. Don't tell me how, gut feeling, instinct. But it wasn't until my 30th birthday, actually, that my husband's mother offered me a DNA test that would provide me with physical proof that I was born via surrogacy. This DNA test showed my real ethnic background, but it also connected me with my cousin, my uncle, my half-brother, my half-sisters, and eventually my biological mother, with whom I had a great conversation. My experience as a surrogate-born child, but also as a woman and a mother, is a great illustration of how women and children pay way too much of a price for commissioning parents' desires to have a perfect newborn baby. I just really quickly want to remind here that there is no international law that provides the right to have a child, but that women's rights and children's rights are protected by international laws. Second point, there is no way of ethically selling babies. Just like there's no ethical ways of selling organs, just like there's no ethical way of buying a woman to have sex with her, just like there's no ethical way to regulate slavery. So, I will not once more address ethical surrogacy like the pro-surrogacy lobby likes to call it, because it does not in any way, shape, or form exist. The pro-surrogacy lobby pushes beautiful stories, nice Instagram posts with beautiful babies, lovely stories, beautiful butterflies. They do it, they're all out. But they don't mention how many risks these women are taking. And they also don't mention that these women, especially in the United States, are, they have to shut up because they signed a confidentiality clause in their contracts, and they are not allowed to speak about their surrogate their surrogacy experience. Or else, of course, they'll be pursued into court and pay a lot of money. Today, I'll be focusing on the child's point of view. So what exactly are the high costs that I think that children have to pay in surrogacy? Of course, I do believe that they have to pay a high price in surrogacy. And I'm wondering, I always wonder why in societies like ours that are supposed to protect the most vulnerable are children having to make the sacrifices for the adults. And I'm wondering why we're letting multi-billion-dollar surrogacy companies and lobbies using children as products in contracts. So first, let's quickly redefine the word product like we find it in the Cambridge Dictionary. So the product is defined as something that is made to be sold. This should be ringing a few bells in everyone's heads, because when we talk about surrogacy, a child is literally ordered, fabricated, and even in sometimes custom made, because we can choose the sex of the baby, we can choose the eye color, and soon enough we're going to be able to choose the IQ of the baby, thanks to technology. And this baby is going to be sold to a commissioning couple who put in a big amount to have the child. So we are commodifying the child, making it the final product to be handed, perfectly made. And I say perfectly made, because if this baby isn't flawless, the parents, the commissioning parents, are allowed to not recuperate the baby and leave it there. And of course, we all know, some of us know, the famous baby gammy example, in which an Australian horrible couple used a Thai woman to have babies. So she had twins, and one of the twins had Down syndrome. So the commissioning parents ordered the mother to abort the baby that had Down syndrome. She refused, and she gave birth to the babies, and the Australian couple came and just picked up one of the babies and left the baby with Down syndrome, baby Gammy, in Thailand with his mother. One agency that I will not name even offers what they call an exclusive insurance, that's in America, in which I quote, covers free restart of the program in case of death of the baby during the first 2 years of life. So of course, if the baby dies within the first 2 years of his existence, the commissioning parents get a free replacement baby. Consumer society is at its finest, I guess. Kind of like you're ordering a car, you arrive, it's tailor-made, you arrive and it's not perfect, you just send it back and get a new one. And I'm, like I said, a pure product of surrogacy. The perfect example. I was ordered, I was fabricated, I was custom made, I was sold, I was bought. And the idea of being treated as an object slowly destroyed me throughout my entire life. A lot of children will never talk that are born through surrogacy because we have this loyalty conflict with our parents. That's why I never talked until I was 30 years old. Because we have the impression and we are obligated to think that we owe them our lives because we cost them a lot of money. So, I have a small group of children born through surrogacy and I exchange with them, and I know all of them will never talk because they're way too scared of losing their parents, like I lost my parents, and I understand. One child she's 22 now, but one of them, and I think of her today, she was bought by a single father. She was abused all her life by that father, and she will never talk, of course, because she's traumatized and hurt, and I don't blame her, and I don't blame any of them, actually. So that's why I'm here, because there has to be at least a voice to speak for these children. In every case of surrogacy, whether it's commercial, like in the United States, or in the UK and Canada, there's always money exchanged. So we're always placing that baby in the middle of a contract. And I have to remind that this goes against the UN Protocol of the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Sale of Children that states in the Article 2 that the sale of children means any act of transaction whereby a child is transferred by any person or group of persons to another person for remuneration or any other consideration. Surrogacy is not worth the price on stepping on children's rights to be treated with human dignity and not to be treated as commodities. Secondly, you have to know that there is no questions that are given to the commissioning parents. So they don't pass any screenings. We are leaving potential pedophiles, abusers, violent people buy babies as they wish just because they have the money. And it is utopic to think that because children are bought for a large sum of money, that they will automatically be happy and cared for properly. So, I mean, children are paying a high price in surrogacy, and that's their protection. Their safety is not in any case guaranteed by the surrogacy agencies that exist, and it is our duty to protect every children on this earth by abolishing surrogacy. We have to be placing the best interests of the child above adults' desires to have children at any price. Thirdly, in every type of surrogacy, the newborn, and this is the part where I get a little bit emotional, the newborn is separated from his mother at birth. No matter what the context around surrogacy is, the baby is in every single situation going to learn who his mother is during the 9 months of the pregnancy. He's going to smell her, he's going to hear her heartbeat, he's going to hear her voice, her emotions, he's going to eat what she's eating. I mean, he knows her, and at birth he will want her. I wanted my mom at birth. But instead, we're just taking the baby and throwing the baby into complete strangers' arms. And this void, as a personal experience, can never, ever be filled. As a child, I was already showing signs of trauma of abandonment with this void. My parents could never leave me, of course. I had trouble making friends. I was afraid of rejection. I was terrible. And actually, I was always, at that moment, I was going, as a child, through an inner battle. How could I build myself without knowing where I came from? And then during my adult life, I sank into alcohol trying to fill that void. I got into addictions. I was raped because I was always putting myself on edge. I made several suicide attempts. I was never able to have normal friendships. I would suffocate people that tried to be my friend, afraid that they would abandon me, pushing them to eventually reject me. And in these situations pushed me into depression. I was alone, unstable, and actually I never was able to find a good job, finish my studies because of the severe depression phases I had to go through. So trust me, a mother can never be replaced. The maternal-fetal bond has been studied thousands of times, and the mother-child attachment has been proven over and over again. So why would this bond miraculously disappear in surrogacy? Why are we inflicting the primal wound that adoptees feel on purpose on surrogate-born children? Why do we not separate puppies from their mothers for 2 months because it's animal abuse if we do so, but we do it to baby humans? And this, I have to remind you that it goes against Article 7 of the UN Conventions of the Rights of the Child. The child shall be registered immediately after birth and shall have the right to, from birth, to a name, to acquire the nationality, and as far as possible, the right to know and be cared for by his or her parents. So the separation of the child from his mother, once again, does not go in the best interest of the child. Fourth and last, I will add that in every case of surrogacy, the origins of on the certificates of that these babies are delivered with are falsified. We literally fake birth certificates, and so that the commissioning parents are presented as the real parents. We steal the identities of these children, like me, replacing them with fake origins. And once again, this goes against the Article 8 of the UN Conventions of the Rights of the Child. State parties undergo the respect to the right of the child to preserve his or her identity, including nationality, name, family relations, as recognized by law without unlawful interference. So we are sacrificing, as children, our origins, our mothers, right in the second that we are brought into the world. So I do think that I have demonstrated in my speech that for the sole purpose of this $14 billion market, and that was in 2022, and it is supposed to be expected to reach $100 billion by 2032. We are making children pay a high cost. We are letting children making the sacrifices for agencies, lawyers, clinics, doctors, brokers that are putting a lot of money in their pockets. Surrogacy violates numerous articles of the Convention of the Rights of the Child and violates children's rights to protection, and we are letting this happen for the sole benefit of multi-billion-dollar companies. I do believe that surrogacy must stop now, And it is urgent to start taking upon an international level on how to stop this massacre by banning surrogacy worldwide, using an international treaty like we are proposing as the Declaration of Casablanca. And countries need to start taking their responsibilities and start protecting the rights of children and their best interests against the greedy surrogacy industry. And I encourage states to urgently sign a treaty to show their desire to engage in the abolition of surrogacy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Olivia, for your courageous words. And thank you, Anna. As I said, unfortunately, Gary isn't well enough to join us in person today, but we are going to play a film of his talk now.
Hello. I'm honoured to have been invited to contribute to this conference. I'm only sorry I can't be there in person with you, as I'm still recovering at home from a nasty virus. Instead, I hope this video presentation will suffice today. At the outset, I'd like to clarify that all the views I share with you in this presentation are my own personal views, and that they are not necessarily the views of any organisation or person I work or associate with. I'd like to talk about the practice of surrogacy as a form of reckless commercialism, and also challenge the burgeoning view that surrogacy should be accepted, promoted, and even paid for by the state, because it's supposedly a gay right or an LGBT+ right. I would also like to explain why the multi-billion-dollar surrogacy industry, which my colleagues and I refer to as part of Big Fertility, has been working hard to market surrogacy as an LGBT+ or gay right. Great harm is caused by surrogacy to interpersonal relations, and hence to societies and civilizations, when surrogacy comes to be not only an accepted practice, but one regarded as morally unassailable. I'm a gay man and have been a gay rights activist since 1982, and for me, campaigning for gay rights means setting objectives that are fair and reasonable, and that do not harm the rights of other minority groups, or of the wider society of which we're a part. Campaigning for gay rights also means calling out bad and harmful practices in the very abstract gay community and the gay rights movement. We do not build a good, supportive and nurturing gay community by turning a blind eye to harmful things that are happening in our own spaces and culture. The maxim that anything goes, or that if it's gay, then it's okay, has no future. Neither does calling people judgmental or homophobic, should they dare to criticise any aspect of the gay subculture. Over the past 10 years, I've been very active in the campaign to abolish surrogacy and have worked closely with my very good and dear friends Jennifer Lal and Callie Fell, who are at the forefront of global anti-surrogacy activism. Although my own anti-surrogacy activism started a decade ago, when I came to realise how horrific and ruthless the womb-renting market had become, my interest in the ethics of surrogacy dates from 1985, when the distinguished philosopher Mary Warnock was one of my tutors. Baroness Warnock was a specialist in reproductive ethics, and her inquiry led to the Surrogacy Arrangements Act 1985 and the UK Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act 1990. I regularly get attacked and vilified, misrepresented and lied about for opposing surrogacy. On some occasions, I've been told that my opposition to surrogacy is an attack on women's reproductive rights, because individual women are the only people who should be able to decide what they do with their own bodies, including carrying babies for other people. One of the lies people tell about me and my activism is that I am allied with conservative Christian organisations, and even a senior member of one of them. Another lie, though a more subtle and crafty one, is when people say that I campaign against the right of gay men to have children via surrogacy, without clarifying that I am also opposed to all heterosexuals being able to pursue surrogacy arrangements. So they give the impression that my activism is simply a campaign against gay parenting via surrogacy. When these lies about me are told, you can be sure that there will be no mention of me being gay, let alone of being a long-standing gay rights activist. In point of fact, I am very far from being a Christian of any hue. I am an atheist and a practicing Buddhist. I speak to Christian conservatives because I want to find new allies everywhere and to encourage people to oppose surrogacy. They often provide vast media reach that the anti-surrogacy activists cannot get elsewhere because opposing surrogacy is now platformed by the pro-surrogacy mainstream media. There are also many wealthy potential surrogacy customers in the conservative community. In the USA, wealthy conservatives rank among the main customers of the commercial surrogacy market, where we are talking about six-figure sums. If we want to stop surrogacy, we also need to talk to the potential consumers, the wealthy, and to encourage them to think twice. A comment on reckless commercialism would be appropriate here. In the conservative, small c, movement, there is great emphasis on free markets and on personal choice. But there are two conflicting subsets in the conservative movement, albeit with some intersection and people occupying various positions on both spectra. There are the libertarians who love the free markets and believe by and large that anyone should be free to sell or buy whatever they want. Then there are the social conservatives who support low taxes and a small state, but who also believe that the free market can cause serious evils unless limits are placed upon what is permissible. So there are people in the conservative movement, the libertarians or ultra-libertarians, who love things like surrogacy. To them, it's all about business and freedom. Someone sells a service and someone else buys a service. These are the kind of people who may support the legalization of all recreational drugs, or of all kinds of sex abuse imagery, or of the sale of kidneys by the poor to wealthy people who need a transplant. Commercial surrogacy fits into that same category. They are not interested in the fact that people are seriously harmed by all these phenomena. What is most important to them is the exercise of personal freedom, the ability to buy and sell whatever you want, and getting the state out of the lives of the general public. The defamers don't bother to mention that I'm gay, let alone a gay rights activist, or that I support the right of appropriately vetted gay and lesbian people to adopt or foster children. Returning here to the theme of surrogacy as the degradation of the human. This degradation has three main prongs. The first is a degradation of the women who agree to carry babies for other people. Often low-income women who need money to pay off debts, and sometimes women who've been coerced to do this by their husbands or families. The second is the degradation of the babies produced by surrogacy, who may be psychologically harmed for the rest of their lives. The third is the degradation of the individuals commodifying other human beings and putting their physical health, psychological health, and lives at risk. Degrading other people is bidirectional. It also harms and degrades the person doing the degrading. When individuals degrade others and degrade themselves, whole societies and civilizations become degraded and harmed. Surrogacy causes harm to women. So-called altruistic surrogacy in the UK is simply lower paid and disguised commercial surrogacy. So-called reasonable expenses can be £18,000 and higher. On top of that, birth mothers are entitled to statutory maternity pay and maternity leave, even though they will have no baby to look after, an added incentive at the taxpayer's expense. As for the bodily autonomy, reproductive autonomy argument, it's not legal to sell our kidneys, and it should not be legal to sell our babies, or even have babies for the sole purpose of giving them away. The criminal penalties should only be imposed on those doing and arranging the commissioning, rather than on the women who are the victims. But the state should be intervening to try to prevent it happening. Human organ sales are illegal across the globe. Only Iran permits it. It's illegal even though people will die as a result of not being able to buy a kidney. But no one will die as a result of not being able to buy a baby. And unlike a kidney, a baby has rights of her own. Surrogacy and living human organ sales create a poor harvesting class and a rich purchasing class, a dehumanized, ugly society. Surrogacy can kill women, widowing their partners and orphaning their children. This gift of life we read about in pro-surrogacy puff pieces can also be a gift of death. All surrogacy pregnancies are higher risk pregnancies, both to the mothers and to the babies. Even normal births put mothers at risk of death. And does it really serve a woman's reproductive rights so well when she surrenders them to womb renters via a surrogacy contract? Surrogacy contracts create psychological suffering and crises for women. What if the commissioning parents demand an abortion she doesn't want to have, or vice versa? There is also regret. The birth mother may discover she doesn't want to hand over the baby at birth. She might discover during the pregnancy that the commissioning parents are actually dreadful, cruel, selfish people who are likely to give the child a terrible life, or suspect that they may be child sexual abusers or child traffickers. Birth mothers sometimes grieve over and worry about the child they have given away for years on end. Surrogacy can harm children. It is unacceptable for a vulnerable newborn to be taken away from her mother at birth. We don't even do that to puppies. The Kennel Club says a puppy should not be taken away from its mother for 6 to 8 weeks minimum. Babies need protection. They come into the world in a very vulnerable state, and we simply don't know what impact separation from their birth mothers at birth will have on them. We should surely err on the side of caution. Surrogacy-born children also risk genealogical bewilderment, which is going through life without the normal sense of being existentially anchored in a biological family history. And the child might wonder, for the rest of her life, how her birth mother could have given her away. Unconscious primordial messaging that cannot be extinguished by rational reflection. The child might end up feeling unlovable and defective. Or she might go through life feeling like an objectified, commodified, purchasable item. What must it be doing to the moral consciousness of a society when the law is allowing often very wealthy people to commodify other people and put their health and lives at risk for a commercial transaction? When it allows a newborn to be taken immediately at birth from the only mother she has ever known, at a time when the human is at her most vulnerable? What is going to happen to civilization when brutal, unempathic, selfish behavior is treated as though it is normal, acceptable, and even good? Big Fertility has found it useful to hijack the gay rights movement as a means of marketing this lucrative form of human exploitation. Surrogacy is being legitimized in the name of gay rights, with the justification that it provides gay men with their own biological children. A big new market for surrogacy is also being created by the transgender movement, given that puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and gender surgeries will often result in the sterilization of the individual undergoing them. Surrogacy is then regarded as a solution if they want to have children in the future, and egg and sperm harvesting services are frequently offered to individuals undergoing gender reassignment procedures for this very purpose. Another income stream for Big Fertility, and very shrewd marketing, given how unpopular it is these days to suggest anything that might be perceived as disadvantaging the gay or trans constituency. It cannot be a gay right or an LGBT+ right to have children via surrogacy. Firstly, there is no universal human right to be a parent. I support gay parenting when gay people are applying to adopt or foster and they have passed stringent vetting procedures. But surrogacy involves putting the physical and psychological well-being of women and children at risk, especially those of low-income women or women acting under duress from their husbands or families. You can't have a right that violates the right of another person or group. Apart from being a bogus gay right, surrogacy is also a very elite and exclusive pretender to right status. The High Court recently assessed the cost of even so-called altruistic surrogacy in the UK to be around £37,000. Working-class gay men normally can't afford that kind of money, and overt commercial surrogacy in California costs six-figure sums. Surrogacy is a bogus gay right that is overwhelmingly for wealthy gay men in the gay community. If society comes to treat it like a legitimate gay right to which every gay person is entitled, it will come with a colossal bill to the taxpayer. I'd like to see an end to reckless, devil-take-the-hindmost commercialism, and I'd like to see big fertility thrown off the coattails of the gay rights movement. People are always more important than profits and vested interests. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. I'm going to speak the words from a surrogate mother, Marian, who can't be with us today. So what I will read now comes directly from her. Firstly, thank you to Lexi for reading my words about my surrogacy experience, which nearly killed me. And despite the child's parents' attempts to intimidate and bully me into silence, here is my truth. This is what is wrong with surrogacy. Too many times people are told how wonderful surrogacy is, what a beautiful gift to give somebody and what a positive experience to go through. And then you hear about the terrible surrogate women who dare to ask for their child back. The all too common depictions in our modern fairy tale world. That fairy tale was what I believed when I agreed to help a family member when she asked if I could carry her child. I was happy to agree at the time and did not need to be paid. I made it very clear that it would be her egg and that I must be allowed to see and have contact with the child I would give birth to. Of course, there is trust, I was told. You will be the child's godmother. These words uttered from her mouth would later come back to haunt me. I actually do not believe she knows what the word trust means. I was made all sorts of promises, deliberately to brainwash and coerce me into agreeing to help her. You see, that is what is wrong with surrogacy, the exploitation of the word trust. The HFEA guidelines horrifies me by stating that the best form of surrogacy is with a family member, as there is trust there. My only stipulation on my family member was to ensure contact, as I said directly in these words, that I could not live with giving birth to somebody that I would never see again. I trusted her, and she exploited that trust. So I entered into this with trust and came out of the experience as a very broken and deeply traumatized woman. The experience was bad enough, the control of my body taken over by somebody else trying to advocate what medical procedures you should endure, how you should give birth, what you should eat. The list goes on. It affected me right from the start of the pregnancy, and yet there was, and still is, no specialised support for women going through a surrogacy pregnancy. But the worst was yet to come. After giving birth and having been told to exchange the child in a hospital car park because that was hospital policy, I was presented with all sorts of legal documentation that I was forced to sign. Even the timing was horrendous, just when I was still trying to recover from the birth. Try to imagine training your body and mind for 9 months that you are not the mother of the child you give birth to, because every surrogate woman has to do that. You do that, and then you are presented with a document that states you are the mother and you are forced to sign it. Then being threatened with financial and legal consequences if I didn't. That is the very dark side of surrogacy that exists in the UK that nobody hears about because most women are slapped with gagging orders to prevent them from talking about it. Then, to add insult to injury, the child's parents go to the media to sell their story, posting intimate scan pictures of your body during pregnancy without your permission. There's another issue. How can people be so cruel as to post pictures of your body without your consent, and then, when you complain, they accuse you of harassment? They truly felt they owned me and that I was their property for 9 months, and any evidence of that 9 months was their own. It felt like I was living in a parallel universe where nothing made sense. The accusations of harassment were just another way of trying to bully me into silence. I, however, will not be intimidated or bullied into silence by those that try to discredit my truth. I had plenty of that experience in the courtroom whilst my consent of agreeing to a parental order was trying to be disposed of, firstly by using my mental health, which was destroyed as a direct consequence of my experience, and then secondly by trying to use a case history of a dead surrogate woman, a true example of trying to remove the existence of somebody that has now become inconvenient. However, through grit and determination, including psychiatric assessment to prove I was able to give consent, and the great common sense of some people, I was allowed to continue to be a presence in the case, although not in the child's life. Despite all the promises and assurances and deceptions about her cancer returning to get me to sign that piece of paper they so desperately wanted, they fulfilled their ultimate goal of deliberately deceiving me into having a child for them with no expectation of being in the child's life, despite that being the condition I had placed from the outset. They hinted at the success of their mission in using me as a cheap form of commercial surrogacy if it hadn't have been for the legal costs. There remains a constant need to remove my existence from the child's life, another reason with which my silence is needed. My belief in the cause of their behaviour was because they resented me from being the child's birth mother, and I think that is me being generous. I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD and underwent EMDR to try and alleviate some of the trauma resulting from the surrogacy. I have a deep fear of hospitals, children, babies. That does not work well when your profession is in education. The damage done to myself will never be repaired. Constant panic attacks and fear and distrust of people are a constant reminder. I needed help in being able to come here today. Unfortunately, Marian wasn't able to join us. The damage is relentless, and yet there is no specialised support for women like me who have been damaged through surrogacy. That is not right. It is sickening to know that a fertility clinic in London has profited from my distress and trauma. No aftercare was ever offered. Deliberate manipulation is a form of exploitation, and this is a pattern of behaviour that sadly I have now seen in too many cases of surrogacy, where the terms of trust, understanding, and the expectations of surrogacy are never met for a surrogate mother. So that is what is wrong with surrogacy: exploitation of trust and deliberate manipulation of another woman. And yet the Law Commission wants to make surrogacy laws easier in the UK. That will just facilitate more women being exploited and manipulated into becoming surrogate women, all without putting in place any support mechanisms and resource structures for women going through surrogacy pregnancies. How progressive we have become in our claim to have made fruitful gains in women's rights. Pitting women against women has never gone down well in history. People ask me, why don't you just move on with your life? Why don't you just forget about it? Would you say that to a woman who is mourning the death of a child? That's where I find myself, in mourning, for a child who was taken away from me in a hospital car park just hours after I gave birth. I can't move on from it, but what I can do is talk about it, to explain what happened and try to bring about some change around what is becoming the normality of surrogacy. A fairy tale normality not helped by how it is presented by some media news organisations. This whole experience feels anything but normal. I wake up every morning and hope that it is all a bad dream, a nightmare. But no, this is my reality. What happened to me is continuing to happen to other women like me, and whilst I would never advocate second-guessing for another woman's personal experience of surrogacy, what I will do is try and give a voice to those who have to remain silent through no choice of their own.
What we all want is for no woman ever having to go through what we have gone through, to be lied to be controlled, and to be made to feel like we are completely redundant and merely a problem when we have done our job and are not needed anymore. We don't want to allow anyone the chance to make someone, another woman, to feel worthless ever again. But of course, there is something else to consider through this. When something, as we have heard, is so exploitative for all involved, why are we considering making it more accessible? If we are that interested in women's rights and protecting women from exploitation, then surrogacy should be banned. There is no safe form of surrogacy, commercial, non-commercial, as seen in my case. It is all based on the exploitation of a body, trust, and multiple human beings. When do we get to the lowest point of treating women with such little respect? When the cost is so high, why is it still legal? The resentment of my gift to them 10 years on continues. The constant intimidation to keep me quiet still goes on. In their desperate attempt to stop me speaking out, they make false allegations up about me, but I will not be deterred. I will not be bullied and intimidated into silence by anyone. I will just keep shouting louder. I want to end on this point. People ask me why I don't move on. Why are you against surrogacy? And the answer is simple. I do not want anybody to go through what I have gone through. If speaking out deters someone from being a surrogate and possibly saves a life, their health and psychological well-being, then my job is done. If you're watching, Marian, we send all our love to you. Thank you. Marian.
Thank you, Lexi. And thank you very much to Marian and Gary for sending us their words. We really appreciate that. And we wish them all the best and hope they get better soon. I'd now like to ask the other panellists who are going to be joining the Q&A to come up onto the stage, please. Anna won't be joining the panel because of her hearing disability, but Liz Purslow will be taking her place. And Liz has many years' experience as a midwife. In addition, Gary is going to be replaced by Marie-Joseph de Villiers, who is the co-president of the International Coalition for the Abolition of Surrogate Motherhood. Now, as we move into the Q&A, I appreciate that there are many things that we can and probably want to talk about. There will be 2 more Q&As later after more panelists, after more speakers have addressed us. So for this Q&A specifically, can you keep your questions on the topic of surrogacy, please? Because that's what this specific time is for. We don't need to agree about everything, and we probably won't, but if everybody could just keep it respectful and civil, even where we disagree, we would all appreciate that very much. There are also some questions that have already come into us via Slido, but if you'd like to ask other questions and submit them now via Slido, say if you want to be anonymous, please feel free to do that. Otherwise, we're also inviting questions from the floor, and we have a couple of roving mics, as I say, so we'll be able to offer people the opportunity to ask questions in person. So I think we'll start with a question from the floor, if somebody would like to be brave and go first. The lady at the front, Shaban, have you got? Thank you. Fourth row. I'm a bit blinded as well, so if I misdescribe what you're wearing or who you are, I apologise in advance.
Given that pregnancy is an immunological battle anyway, there's all kinds of suppression of the mother's immune system that has to happen to be able to carry a child. Has any decent research been done on the effects of carrying a child that is not genetically hers? I'd like to know. It seems to be pretty important, really.
I might take that one if that's okay. So there's no specific research that looks at egg donor conceived pregnancy, although it is sort of touched upon in various different areas of pregnancy, research around pregnancy and labour. But there's a really interesting study that's been recently published from Canada that looks at surrogacy pregnancies. So that doesn't separate out egg donation as egg donor conceived pregnancy, and you're using your own egg. But in that study that came from Canada, it's 3 times the medical risks. And that was conclusive because it supports previous research from the last decade. The number of births, it was just under 1 million, and it was over the space of about, I think it was 5 years. So I'm happy to share that research so that you can actually read the study in full. I hope that helps.
Yes, I might add something to that. This risk is in fact very well known because it has been researched as in cases of IVF with double donation. It is completely well known, and as Lexi said, a surrogate pregnancy is much more risky than normal pregnancy. And what's special about pregnancy is that at each step of the procedure, of the process of carrying and giving birth to a child, there is a special treatment for surrogate mothers who are over-medicalized, who are badly treated. And therefore, that's why we think that surrogacy is really a violence against women. And we want the CEDAW, the Convention Against Discrimination Against Women, to take that into account, that surrogacy should be included in cases of violence against women.
I might just tie in something really quickly. We have no studies on the treatments that are given to these surrogate women because there are high doses of hormones that they have to take. And we don't know what these hormones do. We do know about Lupron in America that is still given to surrogate mothers, that is used for other things like treating prostate cancer and such.
Puberty blockers.
Yes, and they are puberty blockers. So we do give those to surrogate mothers in surrogacy. So we know that this has caused them a lot of harm. But we don't know the effects of the other drugs that are given to them. We haven't studied it. So we have no clue what this is going to bring about in the next years of their lives. And that is, I think, extremely incredible and dangerous.
Thank you all. Do we have another question from the audience? There are 2 people towards the back I can see. Perhaps the person in blue on the end?
Hello. I heard about this concept of chimerism, where cells from the baby migrate into the carrying mother. And I wanted to know if any of you can explain more, because it is a big deal. Like, you are creating a long-term genetic connection with a child that you don't even get to raise or have chosen the partner with. So if any of you can inform us more on these long-term consequences. Thank you.
Yes, it is called microchimerism. That's, I guess, the word in English, because I can say it in French, but sometimes I have a hard time in English. So yes, the cells of the embryo, the fetus, they migrate into the mother, and they stay for about 30 years inside of the mother, even if she aborts. So in my example, my mother, and this is incredible, she still thinks of me 30 years after I was born, and she still thinks of me every single, she wishes me a happy birthday every single 10th of December every year. So I'm still inside of her body, and that is incredible.
I would just want to add to that, there is some study around the cells once they have migrated, and there's been some specific results from research where the cells will actually rush to the mother's heart when she's having some kind of heart problem. So there's sort of active cells, is what I'm saying, and I thought that was obviously quite a romantic idea that they rush to the heart, but that's a medical significance as well.
Yes, the exchange of cells goes both ways, from the fetus to the women, and from the women to the fetus. And you still have cells of your grandmothers in you. This is something which is very amazing.
Thank you. I have two questions here which are sort of tied together. It's sort of a two-parter which have come in via Slido. They're about the difference between adoption and surrogacy. And the first person has asked, why isn't adoption pushed as an alternative? What's the comparison between adoption and surrogacy in terms of the law and procedure? And then Nick has said in a second question, is adoption really that different, where both industries are profit-making and put the desires of the parents over the desires of the child? So if I could perhaps ask our panel to address that.
Well,
Shall I do the UK side?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of the UK laws, so the law reform of surrogacy is essentially based on, it is obviously state-sanctioned parenthood in the same way that adoption is, but they've actually considered it more as biological parenthood, like how people come about and have babies in other ways, and the comparison is with that rather than adoption. The significant difference in terms of the law is obviously the process by which you actually secure parental rights and responsibilities. In a surrogacy, that's parental order, as we've discussed in Anna's presentation. That is done through the courts, but there is a little bit, social services are a little bit involved, whereas obviously with adoption, it's actually a really, really long process with home visits, and it's much more detailed. So they're not really comparable under UK law at all, and would be much less so under law reform, where CAFCAS, social services, would be removed from the process. Surrogacy agencies would be called regulatory surrogacy organisations, and they would monitor the process, and parental rights and responsibilities would begin at birth. So that would be a significant change under the law in the UK.
About adoption and surrogacy, there is something which is different from, between adoption and surrogacy. It is the request from the so-called intending parents that we call clients or commissioning people. It is the request to have a genetic link with the baby. And this is at the core of the request for surrogacy. And it's a male request because, you know, in surrogacy there is only the male, the sperm link, which is considered important. The women, the oocytes, the eggs are completely taken for granted, and they don't count for the genetic link of the baby. And this request of the male part of the so-called intending parent to have a genetic link with the baby is something which goes back to the Middle Age, when everybody thought that the woman was only a vessel and the baby was coming from the sperm of the male part of the couple. So it is surrogacy is something very patriarchal, in fact. And how come that somebody can think it important to throw his DNA into the world so that he will buy a baby with a genetic link with him? It's something which has racist roots, roots also coming from inequality between men and women, being there is something which is misogynist about it. Well, something nasty.
Mm-hmm. I have a very particular point on adoption, so it's difficult for me to answer, but I guess the main difference between surrogacy and adoption, even though we share a lot of similarities with adoptees, I have to say, in adoption, a child is abandoned and we try and give him a better life. We are trying to repair a situation that was caused to the child, and we try to make his or her life better, and I say try. In surrogacy, we inflict the abandonment on the child. We do the opposite. We inflict the abandonment, and then we just think that everything's going to be fine, and they're going to forget that they have different origins or whatever, and they're going to be happy. And so I have to recall a study that was done on adoptees. There's 4 times more suicide attempts in adoptees than in normal born children that are in normal families. So this pushes just me to ask, what happens with surrogate-born children that are inflicted with the trauma of abandonment?
Thank you all. I will... Oh, sorry, please go ahead.
If I could just add, so in adoption, it's very rare these days, at least in the UK, for newborn babies to be available, and people want that newborn baby. They want their own genes, so that's the attraction of surrogacy, and it's increasingly difficult to numbers game for adoption. And just to clarify one of the things that what Marie-Joseph was talking about with the sort of patriarchal male sperm dominance. So Renata Klein's talked about it, so I'm pretty sure it's Australia, but I think probably some other countries maybe. So, for instance, an Australian heterosexual couple who go abroad to obtain a baby through surrogacy, when they want to bring that baby back to the country and get passports or whatever papers, they have to go to the Australian embassy, wherever they are. A DNA test is required to prove the male paternity, but even if it's the woman's, the wife or partner's own egg, that her DNA doesn't count. It just needs the male DNA for them to be able to get that legal recognition. So I think that spells out a lot of what that's all about.
Do we have another question somewhere in the audience? A woman next to the one who's standing up.
Hi, thank you. I'm sorry, but this whole surrogacy process, it just reminds me of slavery, where male slave owners got to get as many new humans that they can sell or own or do whatever. And I was also struck by the legislators in this country that seem to think that £18,000 or £32,000 is virtually nothing, while we heard earlier about women who work on OnlyFans 40 hours a week for £100, and we know all the women that cannot feed their children, cannot buy food in this country, and they have to go to food banks. So I'm just wondering how we get these legislators to acknowledge the lives of women, how much £32,000 means for somebody, and therefore, they don't really have a choice if they already can't feed their children. This is not an actual choice, isn't it?
Thank you. I don't know if anyone would like to speak to that particularly.
I mean, in terms in the UK of being speaking to the legislators, we have some postcards at the stand at the back there and the briefing where you can write to your MP. The postcard can go straight to your MP, or you can use the briefing to write a more personal email to them. The Law Commission have concluded their work. Their report was published last March. Along with their report, they quite unusually published also a draft bill. So I think writing to your MP and essentially bringing your concerns to the forefront and letting people know would be the best way. The money side, of course, in the report itself, the Law Commission recognised that international commercial surrogacy is exploitative, but they proceed with the desire to liberalise it and make it easier to do here.
If I understood what you said, you made a comparison between slavery and surrogacy. That's a very interesting comparison. Today, we are advocating for the idea that surrogacy is akin to trafficking in women. There are international treaties dealing with trafficking in women. There is the Palermo Protocol, and we have, we French have revised in Europe a revised directive on trafficking in human beings, and for us, surrogacy is a sort of trafficking in women, as the main point is that women get involved in surrogacy with being deceived on 3 points. The first is that the baby they are carrying is not hers. The first lie. The second is they are not the mother of the baby. And the third point is that they are not selling the baby. But according to the international treaty, surrogacy is the sale of children. Therefore, we feminists should consider surrogacy as a trafficking in women. And we are now getting in touch with feminist organizations dealing with trafficking in women to work on that. And I'd like to ask that to get rid of slavery, it took 100 years. I think that with surrogacy, it will take a long time to be completely banned. But we hope it will someday banned.
Sorry, Lexi.
I was just going to add one point because I thought it was significant about the slavery. So we submitted to the Modern Slavery House of Lords consultation, but the Modern Slavery line in the UK reported 3 cases of forced surrogacy last year for the first time ever. They're called Unseen. You can find their report on their webpage.
That's great, thank you. We've had another question on Slido, which is, I suppose, about the spectrum of technical... Oh. Sure, absolutely. Then we can go for one from the audience, and then we'll take this one.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask, has there been any research into women who are surrogates, what is their financial and economic backgrounds? Because it sounds like very much a class issue to me. This the rich exploiting the poor, and also the wealthy countries of the world exploiting what we call the third world countries, women in those countries. So I think this perspective is really important from my world perspective, because we wouldn't see Kate Middleton advocating this for her daughter, would we? So I think that's something that we need to think about. Thank you very much. I mean, has there been any research into this, their backgrounds? Thank you.
Yeah, so there is some research. I'm just going to read from a blog piece that I wrote that sort of connects to this. There was some research done by a pro-surrogacy academic, and I think it was 47 surrogate mothers completed the survey. Their careers included midwifery, teaching and nursing, so there's a kind of connection with children or pregnancy. It's quite common for surrogate mothers to be in that kind of arena. The survey summarises that most responses, 85%, indicated household income, so that's not their income, that's household income, below 70,000. 4 surrogate mothers said that their household income was above 80,000. But I write here, it's worth pointing out that 44 respondents answered that question, and a quarter, so that's 25%, said they were on a joint income of less than 29,000. And another 30% said that they were on a joint income of between 29 to 40,000. So that's 55% that are on significantly less than 70,000. That blog is on our page. It's called Surrogacy, a New Job Opportunity. So there are connections, obviously, with low-income families, women in low-income families seeking to essentially have their expenses covered and get gifts and have some form of income.
There has been also a study in America that has been conducted by the CBC network by Jennifer Lal. Gary Powell talked about her. And I don't have, the data in my head, but you can go online and check it out, and you can see that what they use the money for. So paying their house, paying their debts. You have that crackdown in that study. I don't have it on me, but you can check it out. So CBC Network, Jennifer Lal, and but there hasn't been significant research done. And we know that in Ukraine, for example, there's this big company in Ukraine, and the director of the company said, and you can check that out online, he said directly that he only recruits poor women for rich couples, and so he goes and recruits in Georgia, he goes and recruits in other countries around, Moldova. He stated that bluntly, so even they agree that only poor women can do this. I've never seen a rich, wealthy lawyer or Kim Kardashian, exactly, carry for a poor woman, so.
There is also a study in Australia showing how the discrepancy between the income of the intending parents and the income of the surrogate. It is very important. And as you said, in Ukraine, most of the surrogate come from refugees from the Donbass, and where they are coming from, they are taking from. And our colleagues in South America and Spain, they are talking about, they are considering that surrogacy is a form of extractivism. Extractivism is used in economical studies to show how the Western world are taken for example, sorry. They are taking, for example, the raw products from the global south, taking it to the Western countries and making profit out of it. So they are thinking that our colleagues in Spain and South America, they are thinking that surrogacy is the same thing. They are taking human resources from global south to Western countries through surrogacy. For example, another example, in Ukraine, there is a very very drastic drop in fertility, in birth rate. Very low drop in birth rate. And at the same time, Ukraine is producing 2,000 babies a year for Western countries. That is extractivism. That is taking human resources from other countries to our countries, Western countries.
I think. Thank you.
Can I just say something too?
Yes, please.
Yes. So, I also think it's important to recognise the wider global picture compared to how it is in the UK, which is, I'd say, a little bit of a bubble compared to the rest of the world. So there are surrogate mothers in the UK who, say it's all wonderful and they're all part of the pro-surrogacy lobby. They're very protected in the UK with maternity rights, the NHS. Surrogate mothers in America's renowned for very poor maternity rights, and then, problems obviously with the completely different health system there. In the UK, I do have faith in the NHS that the understanding regarding safeguarding and so forth, which, other mothers around the world simply don't have these levels of protection. In the UK, there is one surrogate mother who's got a YouTube channel, so she's had 2 surrogate babies now. She did this. She has a well-paid job. I think she earns over 40,000 a year. She did this to have her 1 year. Her company provides enhanced maternity benefits compared to the basic. She did this to have 1 year off to go travelling. She calls herself the travelling surrogate. So, and she's done that twice now. So, you know, it's not just going to be poor women, actually, necessarily in the UK, who would be attracted into surrogacy. Though, you know, I never imagined that people would, women would, you know, think a great way to have a paid year off. I think she got 6 months full pay and then a period on half pay. So, as well as other benefits. So it's worth remembering that, and I think it's important to keep your eye on the more global picture, not just how it is in the UK.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think that's a really important point to end on, that it's the global picture that shows us the reality of the exploitation industries. I'm really sorry, we are out of time for questions on this topic. So with thanks again to our panelists, thank you for speaking and thank you for answering questions, and thank you for the questions we've had from the floor. If you join me, thank you. So we're going to have our lunch break now. We are going to start again in an hour, which I think is 1:40. In terms of afternoon workshop sessions, this is the programme. If you brought your lunch, you're welcome to stay here and eat it. The cafe is open. There are plenty of places nearby. And if you're on the live stream, we are going to close the live stream now, and we'll start a new live stream for the afternoon session at 1:40. So see you back here then.